Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 34, and my name is Janet Szabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. We are in May now, and you wouldn't know it because it's still kind of cool and rainy. May and June are typically our rainy months, but this has been a colder spring than we expected. And it looks like we're actually going to jump right from winter to summer because this weekend it's supposed to get up into the mid-70s. And it looks like it might stay there for a while. So the plants in my greenhouse will be happy. We don't have to worry so much about the baby animals. We moved our baby chicks from their brooder box in the garage out to the chicken coop with the big chickens. And they're still under a heat lamp, but now they have a little bit more room to run around. And we got 5 baby pigs on Saturday. So the piglets are out in the pig pasture. And pretty soon we'll let them out of their enclosure and let them start exploring the pasture. So things are hopping and things are happening around here. And as usual, there hasn't been a whole lot of sewing. I know I sound like a broken record when I say that, but it's just part and parcel of this time of year. I did do a couple of class store samples to put on display at the stores where I'm teaching. I'm teaching Gail Yellen's Christmas stocking class, and so I made a couple new versions of both the serger version and the cover stitch version. Learned a lot about my cover stitch machine. I have a Janome 3000 CPX, and while it's typically a great machine, it really did not like the Glamour 12-weight metallic thread that I tried to use. I think some of it was due to the angle of the thread path. As the thread comes down, it makes a hard right turn through an opening, and that's where the thread was getting hung up. I switched to a 12-weight rayon thread, Wonderful Accent, and that went through like butter, so it doesn't always mean that there's something wrong with the machine. Sometimes it could be an issue with the thread, and I use Glamour all the time in my serger. It's one of my favorite threads, but I'm aware now that my cover stitch machine isn't terribly fond of it. I did a fairly large closet purge this week because I need to get my summer wardrobe under control. My winter wardrobe is well on its way to being a nice capsule wardrobe. My summer wardrobe is still a mess. I need nice tops and blouses, but the problem is that when I have time to sew during the winter, I'm not thinking about making tops and blouses to wear when it's 80 degrees out. And when it's 80 degrees out, I typically don't have time to be sewing those kinds of outfits. So I've made a list of what I need, and I'm pulling out some patterns and some fabric and hope to get to making some of those items in the next couple of weeks. I don't have a lot of sewing news to report other than Joann's has exited their bankruptcy reorganization. I'm pleased that they didn't have to close any stores or lay off any employees, although I think their employees took a fairly hefty pay cut, some of them, and I'd like to see that reversed. But we'll see going forward if they're able to rescue the sinking ship. You know, their name is Joann Fabrics, and I wish that they would remember that fabrics is part of their mission, part of their branding, and they should be selling fabric and not plastic stuff from China. But we'll see. I actually am heading to Seattle this weekend to spend Mother's Day with my younger daughter there. And I'm curious to see what the Joann Fabric stores look like in her area, because ours I don't think is representative of at all of anything that's going on in Joann Fabrics nationwide right now. So we have kind of a longer interview today. My guest is JoJo Beazel. And I met JoJo on the Vintage Industrial Sewing Machines group on Facebook. I asked if anyone there would be interested in being a guest on the podcast, and JoJo filled out the guest form. And we got together a couple of weeks ago and had a wonderful conversation about vintage industrial sewing machines. She's got a thriving business called Seams Perfect, in Fresno, California. And if you have any interest in vintage machines at all, be they domestic or industrial, I think that you will enjoy this interview. And if you don't yet know about the wonderful world of vintage sewing machines, maybe this can be your introduction. So without further ado, we'll get into the interview. I am here with JoJo Beazel, who is the owner of Seams Perfect. She does industrial sewing machine repair in Fresno, California. So welcome to the podcast, JoJo.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Let's talk about, do you sew? And I ask that question only because I don't want to make any assumptions. So my piano tuner doesn't actually play the piano. So some sewing machine techs sew and some don't. So let's start there.
Yeah, actually, I do. I'm very enthusiastic about sewing. It's actually kind of a thing that I like that sort of sets me apart from a lot of other technicians. I used to be an auto mechanic, and a lot of auto mechanics hate cars or like don't drive, and I thought that was really weird. But yeah, I sew. I love sewing. There's a few different types that I do. It's mostly as a hobby.
If I understand correctly, it was during the pandemic that you got the idea to repair and refurbish vintage sewing machines. Is that correct?
Yeah, it goes a while back as far as being like a curiosity. It goes all the way back to my childhood. But during a little bit before the pandemic, I had a woodworking business, which I still had during the pandemic. And I was making furnishings, fine furnishings and whatnot, and I wanted to be able to make upholstered pieces. And so uh, I got this idea, I'm going to get an industrial sewing machine. And so I didn't really know what one was at the time. I knew I had seen them, but I didn't know what actually made up that term industrial sewing machine and like what an upholstery machine was, what the kind of machine it was that was needed. I thought, like many people do, that you just need like a heavy old black Singer or something like that, and then you know, you can just keep trucking. But the answer was a lot more nuanced and took quite a bit of research. And I also kind of just I had bought a machine that was broken on purpose because I was like, oh, this is a good way I could save some money, you know. And I bought a Juki that was out of time, and I was like, well, I'm an auto mechanic. I could probably figure this out. And so I did. And then I just at the same time I'd all found like an old Viking and a Singer, and I just kind of started collecting sewing machines and restoring them because it's like, hey, I really like these. These are great, you know. And I realized that, I love sewing, and I started doing some like free motion embroidery and or thread painting, if you will. And I wanted to make bags and just a lot of different things like that. And it's expanded from there. Oh, and of course, I wanted to be able to upholster. But what ended up happening was I got all these machines where I just kind of was restoring them. And I would have preferences. And when I went to sell a machine that was no longer of interest to me, people would be like, "Well, hey, who did this work? It's really good." I'd be like, "Oh, it was just me," and they'd be like, "Oh, can I bring my X machine to you, or do you have other machines you sell? And do you have anything that?" One of the big ones that they would say is, "Well, do you have anything that stitches leather?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know. Let me see." I did a lot of research about that and kind of discovered that no, I mean, you can stitch leather with an old sewing machine, but you're going to have a bad time, you know? And there's a lot of differences that are important, and it's not just that the machine has to be strong. As a matter of fact, that would be like a tertiary difference. Uh, and so with all kinds of new knowledge that I gained over time, and just this kind of continual influx of machines that I was buying and taking on for free, I just kind of pushed myself more and more and found more decrepit machines to restore. And it was kind of like I'd get a machine and I'd go, well, I have no idea if this is ever going to turn again, but let's just see, let's just experiment. And I kind of knew I was onto something when I could get machines that had been sitting around for a decade or more outside, and I could get those working again perfectly. And I would take like a lot of pride in it. And people started to kind of take notice, and they're like, will you sell me a machine or what have you? And it just very quickly became more doable than my woodworking business. I kind of transferred into it career wise, and I don't really do the woodworking as a career anymore.
Who knew?
Yeah, it's crazy. It was a really wild twist, and it's been a wild ride. Like my initial kind of foray into it as a business was when I went to this estate sale of like a hoarder, and they had a whole bunch of really poorly stored machines that had been through a lot. The guy had collected probably about 50 machines, and most of them had been left outside. The ones that hadn't had been surrounded by like he hoarded animals, so you can kind of extrapolate. And so like all the machines were like hazmat levels of gross. I was just like, oh, I can't let those go. But if I take on another 30 machines while I have 50 already, or I was getting really close to 50 at the time, I should probably like be really serious about this so that I don't become a hoarder myself or something. And so I was like, I'm going to go into business.
I'm curious. Can you maybe describe, you talk about them being hazmat level. Can you describe what's the worst machine? Do you have some kind of special story about the worst machine that you've managed to bring back to life?
That's an interesting one. There's probably several that fit that example. One was a patching machine that the lady had been using in her garden as just like a garden decoration. She had been told by a technician before that point that it was unrestorable. And I saw the treadle and I was like, huh, I wonder if there's a machine that goes with that. And she's like, oh, yeah, it's in my garden. And I was like, well, I'll buy that for an additional $25 or whatever. And I ended up restoring that one to full function, and it was up until, yeah, it ended up with a leather worker in the Bay Area, and that was pretty cool. That was a big change. And then there were some that were like they had been inundated with urine, which is highly corrosive, and probably one of the most corrosive things you can leave on a sewing machine is just lots of urine and doo doo. And so I had a couple of machines where it was like that. And I had to clean them like two times before I brought them inside and just all this stuff. And I'm kind of good at cleaning. I used to flip cars and stuff, and I would just kind of take on absurd projects. I, you know, I would just kind of whittle away all the grime and muck after doing the initial kind of sanitizing. And I learned techniques for like rejuvenating the original paint and protecting the original decals and things like that. So you could take a machine that had been sitting for years and turn it into, a lot of times it would look like it had never been left, neglected. Because in a way, the dirt and grime will protect a lot of that, a lot of the original detail. It kind of creates like a coating if you know how to remove it non-abrasively and that sort of thing. But yeah, a lot of those ones, I got clever ways of going about it and cleaning up every nook and cranny. And then I
So,
kind of evolved a process of actually gutting the machines and individually curating each part.
do you take them completely apart then?
Yeah, as I was starting to say a minute ago, I actually my business model is restoration, or I think it would probably be better described as reconditioning of old machines. I don't like the restoration title as much because a lot of times that assumes that you paint it, but I don't like
Mm.
repainting them because, a lot of times these are machines that are over 100 years old, and they came from factories, maybe something cool like a Levi factory, or they were used by a costumer in Hollywood or something like that. They have stories, and there's a lot of intrigue surrounding that. And anyone who likes old things probably knows about the beauty of patina. Some of the patina on these machines is incredible, and I would never want to, sully that by putting on new inferior paint. That's lipstick on a pig.
Who are your customers? You said you sold the patcher to a leather worker.
Yeah, so initially I was mostly working with like upholstery uh people, people who needed like a walking foot upholstery industrial machine. But I've actually kind of moved into more niche categories as like my MO. I've kind of worked more with like specialty machines. And so I have clients who do like selvage denim, um, bag makers, shoe makers, and shoe customizers. And there's it gets pretty esoteric. People who uh, make parachutes or sails or even wigs. One of my customers needed an unusual machine, so they could repair horse blankets. And so kind of another skill that I have developed is to be able to locate unusual equipment and negotiate for it and stuff like that. So like I kind of have gotten to the point where a lot of people will go, "Hey, can you get me X machine that I need for, authentic uh selvage denim production, or so I can make dog harnesses or all kinds of things like that."
It's always fascinated me that there are so many specific industrial machines. I was at an exhibit a couple of days ago where there was a Singer machine that was dedicated to doing nothing but sewing on buttons.
Yeah, I have some of those.
Do you?
Uh-huh.
That's just fascinating to me that everything was so specialized.
Yeah, they're incredible. There's thousands of types of machines, or industrial machines for production and commercial use, that they get hyper specific, like machines just for ruffling, or machines just for turning a collar over or something like that. But they get a lot more interesting too. Um, and a lot of times there's kind of like niche industries with niche machinery that hasn't even been like reproduced. Going back to the denim thing again, leatherworking is another one, but the denim people, like, it takes probably 12 to 15 machines to do denim like they did in the 1920s Levi factories and things like that. And each one is as unusual as the next. Most of them don't even look a whole lot like sewing machines. I love that kind of alien aspect. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite things is when a potential seller calls me and says, "Hey, I got this machine. Oh, I think it's a sewing machine. It's kind of, it says Singer or whatever. Like they they might have experience with sewing machines, but it's like so unusual in its configuration that, well, of course, it's because it's a highly specialized machine." And one such example And it's also one that fits that kind of restoration that was like, whoa, kind of category is a chain stitch machine that an upholstery business sold me. Uh, the Singer 114W103 chain stitch embroidery machine?
Mm-hmm.
It's famous for the chenille type patches
Right.
on Letterman jackets, and they also does that chain kind of monogramming that was on old bowling shirts and so on. Well, one, that is a really popular machine right now. A lot of people want one. Two, it's an unusual machine that even a lot of technicians aren't familiar with, and there's kind of like a lot of lost trade secrets and stuff. Uh, and three, it's kind of a fussy machine. It's very unusual. It looks different. It works different in just about every way. And I kind of have fallen into the niche of being like a person who restores those. And when you are like, you can have clients go, "Hey, I'll ship you my machine." You restore it, you ship it back, and that can be like a whole business model into itself. And I've kind of had that develop over time. Done quite a few of those. But
It's
this one machine that I got from the upholsterer, I should say, it was really bad. It was so rough. He said he got it from a guy who did bull riding costume, and I thought that was really interesting. Like was this like in a PRC rodeo or something? And then every part of it was gummed up and rusty and tarnished and whatnot. And I got the thing looking like jewelry when it was done, and that one's happily in someone else's hands now too. Can't keep them all.
I know. It almost sounds as if you're part technician, part detective, part historian.
I would say that's accurate. I'm definitely about equally focused on all three of those things. It's a lot of fun. I love it when someone says, "Hey, what's this machine?" I'm like, "Oh, send me a picture. I'll identify it." Like, and if I can't, then I'll figure it out because like it's a fun game for me. It's kind of like one of those guess that object kind of games. Someone sends you a blurry picture of the corner of a machine across the room, and we're like, "Oh, easy one is, oh, that's a featherweight," uh, but sometimes it's something that's a lot less obvious, and you go, "Oh yeah, I figured that out."
Do you have to go very far afield to find these machines, or are they coming to you now?
They kind of come to me now. Initially, I was kind of working where I would go like almost anywhere in California and like northern Nevada. And I have even had like people who I would give them like a finder's fee or something like that, and facilitators and so on. I still occasionally get things from pretty far away as the opportunity presents itself if it's worthwhile. But for the most part, I'm getting a lot more contacts from just people out of the blue saying, "Hey, you want to buy this machine? Hey, what is this machine?" You know, I always enjoy that, and I'm open to looking at anything. Though the industrials thing is what I focus on, which is primarily just because it's so niche. Like there's hardly anyone who's doing industrials. There's not even that many sewing machine technicians, but there's probably like a tenth as many industrial sewing machine technicians.
The machines coming out of Hollywood?
Uh, I'd say that happens fairly often. You see, in Los Angeles, the garment industry is like basically the biggest in the world, or at least it was for a long time. And so it's kind of a good repository of like production commercial machinery in general, especially sewing machinery. It's like pretty much every time I go to LA, I have family there, so pretty often I'll pick up a couple machines and load them in my car. When I first started this, I had like a little compact car, and I would do crazy things to get machines. I would put four industrial machines in my Hyundai Elantra, and like it would be sitting halfway on the ground, and it'd be like, can my tires make it home? You know? And for the record, to do that, I had to take them completely apart and Tetris them into the car.
Right.
Yeah, but worth it. It was those little adventures. I've tied sewing machines on top of my car. Just crazy stuff. But it's what you got to do sometimes to survive. And so,
Right. Do you work on sergers at all? I'm curious.
like I can to some degree, but it's not really my area of expertise. Like I understand them to a point. I have some, um, and occasionally I'll get one going, like a simpler one or an older one, especially an older one, like a Marrow. I
Hmm.
don't know if you've ever seen a Marrow, but they're like really simple and also really robust. And they're like the same design being made for the last 100 years or more. Matter of fact, I have one from like 1912. It's pretty cool.
Wow.
But yeah, unless it's like a serger that's known for doing the hems on like Levi's or something like that, I usually leave those to the other shops. They're a little more complex. Same with like cover stitches and that sort of thing. It I've done a few, but it's like not as necessary.
And you just opened a studio, am I correct?
Yeah, I just moved into this really cool art studio and gallery locally here. It's called Chris Sorensen's studio. Um, it's just outside of downtown Fresno here in California. And it's so cool. I'm really grateful that I can be a part of it. It's um it's like a collective of about 65 artists, and we all have like our little spaces that vary in size and type, and people do uh they do like jewelry, fine art, um, as in painting and photography and things like that. Ceramics, and a big one is metal sculpting. There's a bunch of metal sculptors there, and I think that was one of the reasons that I was able to get in, is because it's kind of like an industrial art thing. And I was just like, you know what, I really like the art aspect of this, and I like the art community. I'm artsy fartsy, and so it works. It's a really good dynamic, and I kind of am able to bring something interesting to it. We have a thing monthly called Art Hop, and it's when people jump around to all these different art establishments in the area, and it's really big at the studio that I'm at. And so what I do is like I'm doing these demonstrations, and just kind of trying to make it fun and interesting to draw people in, bringing out like some kind of unusual machine. This next month it's going to be a chain stitcher, and I'm just gonna, I'm not like particularly good at chain stitching, but it's so fun and interesting. Most people have never seen how things are made with a chain stitch embroidery machine. Who knows? Maybe the next time I'll sew plywood.
That sounds like fun. And I would venture to say that a lot of people out there just aren't familiar with where clothing comes from in general.
Yeah, or anything in general. Well, I mean, like other sewn objects. You think about it. Uh, every soft good pretty much is sewn in some way or other in order to produce it. But there's also a lot of things that people don't realize are sewn, like books. I have a variation of the machine that's known for doing that, and wigs was one that surprised me. I had a guy contact me, and he was like, "I want to be able to restore baseball catcher's mitts." And I was like, huh, I wonder what that machine is, you know? And I had to kind of figure it out because it's apparently a closely guarded secret by the people who restore baseball mitts.
Wow. Where do you see this going in the next couple of years?
Well, I think that I'm more than content with it being kind of a simple, grassroots kind of thing. I want it to remain sort of a passion project. Like, yes, it's my career, but why do something this awesome if you're going to stress about it all the time? So, I try to cultivate an enjoyment aspect of it and kind of an interactive aspect of it. My social media, I try to do like some content creation and stuff that's like informative and uh attractive because that's the world we live in now. You can't really get a foothold without that or a lot of money or both. So um so I'm just content with churning out beautiful and amazing machinery that like I can resurrect from all these terrible circumstances that they sometimes come from. And I love seeing what particularly like more arts oriented people, artisans and crafts people do with these machines. I always tell someone when they buy a machine from me, I'm like, please send me pictures of some projects you make with it. Like I love seeing, and it's like it's good for business too, but I love seeing what people make with this with these machines. Everyone, has so much talent, whether it's uh these like production garment makers who can sew at 5,000 stitches per minute without breaking a sweat, and or the chain stitchers or Irish embroidery. Leather workers are incredible. A good upholstery worker, just amazing. It's art. It's truly art. It's a fiber art, but every bit as wonderful as the nicest painting or something. Yeah, and the machines themselves are art, especially the older ones. They're gorgeous. I love looking at them. I love having them around me. I'm an enthusiast about sewing and the machines as like separate entities. Um, in that sense that usually, or you hear memes a lot of the time that are like sewing and sewing supplies are like separate hobbies or whatever. Um, what is that?
Shopping for fabric is different than sewing with fabric.
Yeah, exactly. It's two different hobbies. Maybe you just want to collect fabric,
Right.
or sewing machines. I personally want to do both, and I love it when people do both. And I think that the sewing machines, like, regardless of whether it's your grandma's machine or a priceless collectible or something, like, I like seeing them stitch. I want them all to make stuff. And one thing that I want to kind of kill is the notion that every new machine is a better stitcher than the old machines. Like a lot of marketing went into making sure that people kind of thought that old machines were inferior in sewing. And I remember thinking that's weird that sewing machines are like the only old machine that isn't better than the current ones. And then I went and stitched with a Singer 201 and it was that was bull, that wasn't true at all.
Yeah, so I was admiring your Necky BV because I also have one, but I do all of my quilt piecing on a Necky BF that, as far as I can tell, dates back to about the late 1940s.
That's great. One of my favorite personal machines, I have about 20 that are mine. But one of my favorite personal machines is wait, no, I think it is a BV. No, BU. It's a BU.
Uh-huh.
The first run BUs. I got it. I went to a place where a guy had like this machine on OfferUp or something, and it was so rough, but he wanted like $20. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna go. I show up and it's like in the alleyway, and he's like, you know what? You don't even have to pay me, just take the thing. I mean, it was gone, But I was like, what a beautiful little machine. And I learned all about like what's his name, Vittorio Necchi.
Right.
And I was just like, I have a special place in my heart for Necchis, especially. They're magnificent machines with fantastic engineering, and the machining quality is good. And like a lot of Italian things, they're so beautiful.
Yes. Well, this has been wonderful. How can people find you on the internet?
Well, I have Seems Perfect industrial and vintage sewing machines on Facebook. Much more actively, I have Seems Perfect SEW. And by the way, it's a pun, SEAMS Perfect SEW. On Instagram. Um, my Instagram is my more active account. I do kind of have a website in the works, but it's not necessarily as necessary for what I do. A lot of what I do now is word of mouth and social media stuff for my connecting. But or you can just call me 559-549-3396. I'm always there to pick up the phone.
Awesome. I will make sure that we put links to all of those in the show notes.
That's awesome. I appreciate it. I appreciate the kind of leg up that this is. And I just love sharing enthusiasm for sewing machines. And I want, oh, there's one other thing I want to add if it's
Sure.
cool.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you if you have like an old machine that you don't know if it works, or you have grandma's machine or something like that, and you want to sew, I don't know, just go on like YouTube, look at the model numbers. Like you can get these machines going. People can fix these things. I didn't think I could fix sewing machines 3 years ago. I actually joked about how I could fix any machine but a sewing machine for a long time. And then one day I just was like, maybe I can fix a sewing machine too. And I just learned how to do it. And not that I don't acknowledge that that's like a privilege and stuff, but I think that a lot of people underestimate their ability to make things go. So worst you can do is try, and you'll probably have a really good time and develop a new addiction, and that's a good thing, by the way.
That's a wonderful note to end on.
It's really nice talking to you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I enjoyed my conversation with JoJo, and I hope that you did too. There are lots of great vintage sewing machine groups on Facebook. There are groups that discuss general information about vintage machines, and there are also more specific groups devoted to particular models or brands of machines. Just go to Facebook and start looking around, and you'll be able to find a group that meets your needs. As always, if you'd like to leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or one of the other podcatchers, I would love it. It does help other people find the podcast. We have a guest form on the podcast website at thestraightstitchpodcast.com. And I ask that anybody who might be interested in being a guest on the podcast fill out that form. I host my podcast over at Buzzsprout, and they have a new feature that they just added a few weeks ago. It's called Fan Mail. If you listen to podcasts on your phone, the Fan Mail feature allows you to text feedback directly to me through my Buzzsprout account, and it's a quick and easy way for you to let me know if you like the show or if there's something that you want to comment on. Maybe you have a question, maybe you have a suggestion. You can use Fan Mail to give me that feedback directly. The show notes for this week's episode are at the podcast website, which again is www.thestraightstitchpodcast.com. My website is www.janetzabo.com, and my website has links to the podcast website, the Big Sky Knitting Designs website where I sell my knitting patterns, and also to my blog where I write about life in Montana. And I'd love to have you come over there and be part of the community there. So until our next episode, I hope that you have a great week and that you get to go sew something, whether it's on a modern machine or a vintage one.